Daf Yomi Tractate Avodah Zarah, page 61, starting on the bottom of page 60b. Yesterday I said 59 and 58. It was actually 59 and 60. Yesterday was 60, so just clarifying it here verbally. At the beginning of the Daf 60, I said we're on page 59, starting on the bottom of 58. What I meant was to say we're on the bottom of 59 and it's 60. And today we are on 61 and we're starting at the bottom of 60. Okay? Rav Huna raised an objection to Rav Ashi from the Mishnah with regard to the case where a non-Jew took the barrel of wine and threw it in his anger into the wine collection vat. This was an incident that occurred at Beit She'an, and the sages deemed the wine fit for drinking. One may infer that if the non-Jew threw the wine in his anger, yes, it is permitted, but if it was not in his anger, the wine is not permitted. Even though, in the case of a zav, if he threw an object at a vessel, it does not render the vessel impure. Okay, now we move on to 61a, top of the page with the words Hasam de Ka'azl Minei Unei. Rav Ashi replied, there, the Mishnah is referring to a case where the barrel is not actually thrown, rather it is propelled and then again propelled by him until it reaches the vat. Therefore, if this individual did not do so in anger, there is reason to be concerned that he might have touched the wine. Okay, Mishnah, new Mishnah. Bebais, in brackets, Babatuach Nuzrabi, Meir, Sheyesh Bagoyim, Yisraelim, Mutar Beir, Shekula Goyim, Asu Ad Sheyesh Yevu Mishamel. The Mishnah says, in a case of a Jew who renders the wine of a Gentile permitted by treading the Gentile's grapes so that the wine can be sold to Jews, and although a Jew has not yet paid for the wine, he then places the wine in the Gentile's domain, in a non-Jew's domain, in a house that is open to a public thoroughfare until he sells it. The halacha depends on the circumstances. If this occurs in a city where there are both non-Jews and Jews, the wine is permitted, and as the non-Jew does not touch the wine, lest the Jews see him doing so. If this occurs in a city in which all its inhabitants are non-Jews, the wine is prohibited unless a Jew sits and safeguards the wine. But the watchman is not required to sit and guard the wine constantly. Even if he frequently leaves the place and comes in again later, the wine is permitted. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, the domain of Gentiles is all one, as the Gemara will explain. Mutar, aval im yirtzeh Yisrael hoitzi ve'enu manicho ad shitin lo esmo oisav zehaya. In the case of a Jew who renders the wine of a non-Jew permitted by treading the non-Jew's grapes so that the wine can be sold to the Jews, he then places the wine in the non-Jew's domain until he sells it. The halacha depends on the circumstances. If that one writes for the Jew, I receive money from you in payment for the wine, even though he has not yet received the actual payment, the wine is permitted. This is because the wine is considered the Jew's property and the non-Jew does not venture to touch it. But if the Jew desires to remove the wine and the Gentile does not allow him to do so until the Jew gives him the money due to him, this was an incident that occurred in Beit She'an, and the sages deemed the wine prohibited. In this case, the non-Jew believes that he has a lien open on the wine, therefore he has no compunctions about touching it. Gemara, this is the Talmud. Zog the Talmud, Be'ir shekulu goyim nami ve'ikaro echelin namchazirin v'yavoi Somer Shmuel Be'ir sheyesh la daltaim uveriach. The Gemara questions the Mishnah's distinction between a city within Jewish inhabitants and a city without Jewish inhabitants. The wine should also be permitted in a city in which all its inhabitants are non-Jews, as aren't there Jewish peddlers who travel around the various towns? Consequently, the non-Jew refrains from touching the wine, lest the Jewish peddlers see him touching it. Samuel says the Mishnah is referring to a city that has double doors and a crossbar, and the residents know when outsiders enter the city. With regard to the Mishnah statement that the wine is permitted only if the non-Jew's house is open to a public thoroughfare, Rav Yosef says, and if a Jew's window is open to that place, it is considered like a public thoroughfare, and similarly, a trash heap is considered like a public thoroughfare, as many people frequent it, and a palm tree is considered like a public thoroughfare, as the non-Jewish person is concerned lest someone climbing a palm tree see him. With regard to a case where the top of the palm tree was cut off, Rav Acha and Ravina disagree. One of them deems the wine prohibited, and one of them deems the wine permitted. The Gemara explains the one who deems the wine prohibited holds that since no fruit grows on the palm tree, why would someone climb up there? The non-Jew, therefore, has no reason for concern lest someone see him, and he has no compunctions about touching the wine. And the one who deems the wine permitted holds that it happens on an occasion that someone loses an animal, and he climbs up the palm tree to look for it. The non-Jew is therefore concerned lest someone climbing the palm tree sees him, and he does not touch the wine. The sages taught in a Braita, in the case of a Jew who purchases a house, or one who rents a house in a non-Jew's courtyard, and a Jew filled the house with barrels of wine, if another Jew dwells in the same courtyard, the wine is permitted. This halakha applies even if that Jew does not have in his permission the key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine. Now we turn to page 61b. Top of the page is the word Bechatzar Cheres. If a Jew dwells only in another courtyard, the wine is also permitted, but this is only when the Jew has the key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine in his possession, as this prevents the Gentile from gaining access to the wine. Amalei Rabbi Yochanan letana Tane afal bishi ein mafteach v'chotam yado mutar. In the case of a Jew who enters the wine of a Gentile permitted, and the wine is in the Gentile's domain, if another Jew dwells in the same courtyard, the wine is permitted, but this is only when the Jew has the key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine in his possession. Rabbi Yochanan said to the Tana, reciting the Braita, in this case you should teach that even if that Jew does not have in his possession the key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine, the wine is permitted. B'chatzer cheres asu aval bishim mafteach v'chosim yadot Rabbi Meir. The Braita continues, if the second Jew dwells only in another courtyard, the wine is prohibited, even when that Jew has the key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine in his possession. This is a statement of Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis deem the wine prohibited unless a watchman is sitting and safeguarding the wine constantly, or unless an appointed person comes to safeguard the wine. This is referring to a watchman who comes at set times. Chachamim aheya Ile masefa Tanakama nami mesa kas asal Yehoshua seva V'kam ale Rabbi Yochanan Tana Tanei afal bi shem avteach v'chaisim biyadai. The Gemara asks, to which case in the Braita are the rabbis referring? If we say that they're referring to the last clause, this is difficult, as in that case, the first Tana, Rabbi Meir, also deems the wine prohibited. Rather, perhaps, they are referring to the first clause of the last clause with regard to a case where a Jew renders a Gentile's wine permitted, and another Jew dwells in the same courtyard. But didn't Rabbi Yochanan say to the Tana reciting the Braita, you should teach that even if the Jew does not have in his possession the key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine, the wine is permitted? It may be assumed that Rabbi Yochanan does not disagree with the opinion of the rabbis. Rather, the rabbis are referring to the last clause of the first clause with regard to a Jew's wine that was placed in a house in a non-Jew's courtyard. As the first Tana says, if a Jew dwells only in another courtyard, the wine is permitted, but this is only when the Jew has in his possession the key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine. And rabbis say it is always prohibited unless a watchman is sitting and safeguarding the wine constantly, or unless an appointed person comes to safeguard the wine. This is referring to a watchman who comes at set times. Bimune balakitzin geriuta hu ela al shavo mimune she'eno balakitzin. The Gemara questions this ruling: if an appointed person comes at set times, it is detrimental, as the non-Jew knows when to expect the watchman, and he may do as he pleases the rest of the time. Rather, amend the Braita and teach that the wine is prohibited until an appointed person comes, and this is referring to watchman who does not come at set times. Rather, he comes whenever he chooses to do so. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Rishus Goim Achasi Iboilehu. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar lehakel or lehachmir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Zeiri lehakel. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Zeiri lehachmir. The Mishnah teaches that if a Jew renders the wine, if a Yehudi renders the wine of a non-Jew permitted, of a non-Yehudi, that's a good one. If a Yehudi of a non-Yehudi permitted and leaves the wine in the non-Yehudi's domain, the wine is prohibited unless the Yehudi guards the wine. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says the domain of non-Yehudim is all one. The dilemma was raised before the sages. Does Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar come to be lenient or to be stringent? Rabbi Yehuda says, as the Eri says, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar came to be lenient. Rabbi Nachman says, as the Eri says, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar came to be stringent. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Zeiri lahakel. V'hachi gamar Tanakama kishem shebirishus asur kach b'rishus goyach hanami asur. The Gemara explains. Rabbi Yehuda says, that Zeiri says, that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar came to be lenient, and accordingly, this is the first time. This is what the first time is saying. Just as the wine is prohibited when it left in the non-Yehudi owner's domain, so too the wine is prohibited when it is left in the domain of another non-Yehudi, as the bailee might allow the owner to touch the wine, and we are concerned that they might be in collusion, and the bailee will not reveal that the non-Yehudi owner touched the wine, as the owner reciprocates on other occasions. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer B'amei adivayim amurim Yehoshua af b'reshus goy achel mutar v'lo chashin legomlin. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that not all the domains of non-Yehudim are considered as one. In what case is this statement that the wine is prohibited said? This applies only when the wine is left in the non-Yehudi owner's domain. But when it is left in the domain of another non-Yehudi, the wine is permitted, and the non-Yehudi refrains from touching the wine when it is in the domain of another non-Yehudi, as his actions might become known. And we are not concerned that the two non-Yehudis might be in collusion. Rav Nachman Amar Ze'iri Lachmir Lachakama Tanakama B'med Dvar Morim B'Shuso Amar B'Shus Goy Acher Mutar V'lo Chashin Legomlin. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Kol Reshut Goyim Achat Hi. The Gemara explains the other opinion. Rav Nachman says as Ze'iri says. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar came to be stringent, and accordingly this is what the first Tana is saying. In what case is this statement that the wine is prohibited said? This applies only when the wine is left in the non-Yehudi owner's domain. But when it is left in the domain of another non-Yehudi, the wine is permitted. As the non-Yehudi refrains from touching the wine when it is in the domain of another non-Yehudi. And we are not concerned that the two non-Yehudim might be in collusion. Conversely, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says the domain of non-Yehudim is all one, and the wine is prohibited as it is possible that non-Yehudi Bailey is in collusion with the owner. Tanya Kavase de Reb Nachman Namazir Lachmil Amar Bishum ben Elazar Kol Shus Goyim Achati Mifnei Haramayim. It's taught in a Braita, in accordance with the opinion of Rav Nachman, who says, as the Iri says, that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar came to be stringent. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said the domain of non-Yehudim is all one due to the swindlers. This indicates that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is presenting a more stringent opinion. Devei Parzak Rufila Otivu Chamra Gabe Adisaihu Savur Rabanan Kamei Derabad Lememar Ki Rashtino Legomlin Anamili Hera Degamo Sivhai Gabe Hai Abel Hacha Kevin Darise Lav Darka Deos Be Parzak Rufila Legomlin Lochashinan. The Gemara relates that men from the house of Parzak, the vizier, placed wine that had been rendered permitted by Jews who had not yet paid for it in the domain of their non-Yehudi sharecroppers. The rabbis who were studying before Rava thought to say, when are we concerned that two non-Yehudis might be in collusion? This matter applies only in a case where this non-Yehudi places items in the domain of that non-Yehudi and vice versa. But here, since the vizier's sharecroppers are accustomed to place items in the house of Parzak, the vizier, we are not concerned that two non-Yehudis might be in collusion. Rava says to the rabbis, on the contrary. Afilu man yom elachashin gomlin hanimili hechadalo miratat mineh aval hacha kevan de miratat mineh machpe alei zechuta. Rava said to the rabbis, on the contrary, even according to the one who says that we are not concerned that two non-Yehudis might be in collusion, that statement applies only where the other non-Yehudi is not afraid of the wine's owner. But here, since the sharecropper is afraid of the vizier, he covers up for him and testifies on his behalf that he did not touch the wine. Hadu karcho dehabiyativ bechamad Israel ishtagach lo dehavikai beni dinei amrave im nitpas alav keganav chamra shori v'ila baso. There was a certain city in which a Jew's wine was placed. A non-Yehudi was found standing among the barrels of wine. Rava said, if the non-Yehudi can be caught as a thief if he touched the wine is permitted. Since he is afraid of being caught, he does not have the presence of mind to offer the wine as a libation. But if not, it is permitted even to derive benefit from the wine, as it is assumed that the non-Yehudi certainly touched it and offered it as a libation. Hadran alach Rabbi Ishmael. May we return to you. Chapter Rabbi Ishmael. This concludes this chapter of Avodah Zarah. All right.